Hello! Way overdue for a book recommendations video, so here's another. I had several ideas of what theme to make this videos, but I settled on Arab and West Asian socialisms because I've been asked quite a bit about it, and it's a pretty fascinating topic in and of itself. So, let's begin. Hannah Batatu's The Old Social Classes and New Revolutionary Movements of Iraq. This is by far the best singular study of any nation I've ever seen, and I'm more than overjoyed at the fact that such a magnificent work was done on Iraq. Batatu was a Palestinian Marxist who specialized in Iraq, doing his PhD and following work practically entirely about Iraq. Having himself spent a lot of time in Iraq, he developed connections both with members of the various revolutionary movements in Iraq, as well as the various governments that granted him access to secret archives and even interviews with political prisoners. Out of his meticulous work came this, The Old Social Classes and New Revolutionary Movements of Iraq. A 2-volume epic that discusses in ridiculous detail the social and material origins as well as different class characters of the many revolutionary movements prevalent in Iraq at the time. He goes through the development of Iraq into a cohesive political structure, the various classes represented in society, the differing socialist and communist movements, the different compositions, the free officer movements, the Ba'athist movements, etc., etc. I think the excitement in my voice is enough to motivate you to check this book out. You cannot understand, in my opinion, Iraq without reading this book. My favorite bit of trivia about the work is that upon entering on an Iraqi translator studying the book during the Gulf War, the conductor of the illegal invasion, Schwarzkopf, laughed about how thick the 2-volume work was. Afterwards, he pulled out a small pocket tourism guidebook and said, "This is all I need to know about Iraq." Just goes to show that the ignorant are exceptionally good at destroying things. Next up is South Yemen, a Marxist Republic in Arabia by Robert Stuckey. I honestly didn't want to include this, but there's so little written on South Yemen at all, both in Arabic and in English actually, so this is a decent start for those interested. For the uninitiated, South Yemen became a Marxist republic from 1967 until 1990. As a Marxist state, it was kind of strange foreign policy at points, an incomplete nation in many regards, meaning agriculturally, industrially, etc., a mechanical replication of Eastern European and Soviet political policy, a strangely managed economy, and a broken social approach resulted in a nation that is more of a footnote to the general history of socialism than anything else. Regardless, we wouldn't be Marxists worth our salt if we didn't study and learn from our less shiny examples and experiments. As for the book itself, it too is The only reason I'm including it is because it's the only thing in English longer than an article that goes into decent detail. He goes through the general history of Yemen, how the revolution emerged, the social, economic, and political policies that took place, all that. He has some strange positions. For example, he lists the Ayyubid era of Yemen under foreign occupation, which is a strange and ad hoc ahistorical hot take, but whatever. He isn't nearly harsh enough in condemning the British occupation of Yemen, which I remind you was supported by Labour leaders even back in the quote-unquote socialist era of their party, but Western Social Democrat hypocrisy is a conversation for another time. He too doesn't talk much about the very interesting Marxist insurgency in southern Arabia of the era, which I hope to make a video on, actually. Interestingly, he ends the book with the usual ending of books on Soviet or Soviet-adjacent topics of the era, an implicit admission that they think the Socialist Bloc and the USSR are stable political structures that will be around for a very, very long time. Just a reminder of how unexpected it all was. All in all, an anti-communist writes a superficial level read on an obscure topic. Nonetheless, I recommend it because the information is still very interesting and hard to find otherwise. Just read with a discerning eye. The next book is Tariq Ismail's The Arab Left. Another one of those works from absolutely brilliant people. This is a thorough yet still comfortable read on a wide range of communist, socialist, and socialist-adjacent movements within the Arab world. He weaves brilliantly through the development of Arab nationalism, discusses the different branches of Ba'ath ideology, the strategies of differing organizations, development of local Marxist groups, and more. Some may find the book centers a bit too much on Ba'ath movements, but that's simply because they are kind of the largest and more decently organized movements of Syria and Iraq up to a point. My favorite part of the work is the author's own analysis and critique of the various movements. The Palestinian question is also dealt with in some level of detail, and it's interesting to contrast the policies of various groups with those of Palestinian groups themselves. It really is a pleasant entry into the topic, and if you'd like to read anything general at all. Check his other work out too, by the way. Pretty much everything Arab and socialist he's published on. He's pretty cool, actually. The next work is Farah Jabbar's Post-Marxism and the Middle East. I won't lie to you, this isn't a fun read. It's a boring and academic work on the reasons for the breaking apart of socialist approaches in the Arab world, as well as the differing strategies of Arab communist parties after the illegal dissolution of the USSR. It's more a loose collection of essays than a coherent book with a central thesis, and there are a few articles in there that seem kinda out of place. There's even a relevant section of criticism of Batatu's works, mentioned earlier. but overall the book is useful if one wants a cohesive view of the Arab world and socialism. More of a serious study sort of thing. Hey, I found it interesting enough to read. Finally, Ali Qadri's The Unmaking of Arab Socialism, a book that discusses exactly the title. Qadri's work is a fascinating breakdown of the various Arab socialist projects and their pitfalls. Very detailed and number-oriented. It's also more of a serious study sort of work, but that doesn't mean it isn't interesting. He discusses the effects of the various wars that took place, the local limitations, whether they be material or otherwise, public organization and reaction, and a lot more. Very interesting and somewhat obscure book, and the only work on the list still in print, I believe. There's really nothing more to add, to be honest. If you're interested in only a single country than the few discussed, just read those parts and be on your way. Very useful in understanding the several quote-unquote economically liberal turn points many of those projects took. As for our conclusion, all these books are out of print, as far as I know, except for the one I just mentioned, so take a look at LibGen, because it has all of them. I personally formatted all of these books, and many more, as printable PDFs for my personal use, and I do plan on eventually making a resource where you can access all that. I just need a bit of time, as always. But that's all for this time. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Ancom Tree of Knowledge, Dayan Mustafa, Jordy, Andrea V, Fireflies, Thomas Rawson Wood, Johnny Lycanthropy, Lucas Weaver, Chandler Robinson, Reese Rodriguez, Randy, Jacobo Del Valle, Scott Brad, Devin, C. Roshin, Jacob Smith, Samir Nejiran, Luke, Andrew, Igor, Comrade Azrael, Adi Ajit, The Quantum XD, Tacker209, Goshthang America, Crouchet, Nightmare Society, Afak Puja, Talmudic Tranky, Varun, Peter Leon Huff, Orakuda, Ian Snyder, Dan Ludwig, Artemis, Skirkman, Red Lotus 1138, Ryan Mills, Carmet Kyle, Juan Pacheco, Ivan Carroll, Buddhist Comrade, Revis, and Joshua Gonwa. Thanks for watching.